in concluding Trump's first year in the White House, I wanted to determine what's been the most, I guess, annoying part of his tenure consistently. So, for example, I find myself annoyed by many of his policies, but on a day to day, week by week basis, what has affected me the most would probably be in interacting with those who would call themselves his supporters, and what I feel is a tendency for many of the people who align with him to call out any news story that they don't agree with as being fake news. And I want to say hello to the amazing Epix Z. I guess that's Zero. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Um, so one of the things that a linguist said earlier this year, and you can call that fake news if you want to, was that Trump's usage of the word, or term rather, was starting to mess up its actual definition and could theoretically confuse people on what the term actually means. Fake news initially meaning that it's misinformation or hoaxes. Now, earlier this year, I had a conversation with a person, and I was telling them about the Moore story, which was the Senate candidate who was accused of misconduct with various females. And whether you chose to believe it or not, it was first reported by the Washington Post. And this story was later covered by other forms of media. And so I asked him, what's your opinion on this? He goes, "Oh, I don't listen to the Washington Post." I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you about the content of the story. You can't discredit something without actually having seen what it's about, unless it's about you and you know for sure that it's not true. For example, if I read a story tomorrow in the New York Times that says that my neighbor, I don't know, likes to lay at home in the nude, that will be the story they wish to tell, and I can choose to consider it or not. But based off of whatever their sources are, they actually have to corroborate this. I'll draw my own conclusions. If they put out a story about me doing that, I for one know I don't do it, so it would be easier for me to discredit it. And it's this thing where they, thank you, amazing Epic Zero. It's this thing where it seems as though any information that is somehow not necessarily good that is being reported about Trump or someone that they're in favor of, they feel this need to kind of wash away whatever critique is made toward that person. And I'll admit the media has its forms of biases, but we're talking about simply reporting a story. It's gotten to a point where if you tell them, he was quoted as saying this, they'll say, "Oh, that's fake news," but it's not the actual news organization that is um, perpetuating that story. If you have a group of people that have their own thing to tell and they go up to a source, wouldn't the problem be with whoever is actually perpetuating these rumors or charges? So, for example, when you had the allegations against Trump mount in October of last year, um, one theoretically would be upset with the women who said it, or would question them and their authenticity rather than the news sources that are simply reporting what these people had to say, which would make their news, however, it would be true in the sense that they're accurately stating what is being claimed of him. Not that they're saying, yes, this did happen. It's really disturbing because you have to think about it. If one is to say that CNN is false, if one is to say that the New York Times is false, the Washington Post is false, the um, what's another news source? Just all these different sources are false. Then ask yourself, what is the New York Post? What is the National Enquirer? Those were sources that many people consider tabloids, salacious, and it gets to a point where they're trying to stick all of them together, to where ultimately you have to ask yourself, then where do you consider actual news to come from if everything is just full of falsehoods? What I love is that if you actually look at their opinions on these same sources and the stories they tell of other people. So during the Clinton email investigation, or the various controversies with Sanders' wife for her expenditures or something of that sort earlier this year, they were perpetuating those stories. They were saying, "Yep, see, aha, they caught him. They have him in the bind. They caught them." There was no mention of, hey, you know what? They tried to slander Trump, so they're trying to slander these, liberals or left-leaning candidates. Nothing. They will buy into the same sources. Not saying that's a bad thing, though it is, in my view, hypocritical. To take what a source says about a certain group of people over another person, i.e., that they'll believe what's said negative about Hillary or Bernie or whoever else is in the Democratic Party versus what is stated of Trump. I told the same group of people these stories as they were reported by CNN, even when they asked for articles, I linked them to CNN. Nothing about fake news. They say, aha, that's what she gets. That's what he gets. So understand that a big chunk of it isn't necessarily that they actually believe the sources are not telling the truth. They just find it convenient whenever to shut off that particular area of reporting. And it's sad because one of the things I try to kind of distance myself from when it comes to just how people view Trump supporters is this cult personality thing that they were talking about. I said, that's not fair to him because he can't control how people feel about his respective positions. But think about this. You have a presidential candidate who, regardless of how you feel about him, did get many things wrong or just had false statements during his campaign, which was the cause of making remarks that were not scripted, and so you're more likely to trip up. But when you know that person is prone to error in their public appearances, and you have news sources that have multiple people working there to fact check things and that actually have recanted stories when various parts of information were false, what else do you do but believe the news sources over the guy that we know has made statements that were false? And no one's saying he's lying. We're saying that the statements were wrong. Some people make things on accident. Some do it intentionally. All we know is that it was wrong. That some of the things he said on the campaign trail were not true. So I don't see where a majority of Americans would be somehow against him and just thinking to themselves, well, you know what? I'm not going to buy what he has to say because of all the other things he's gotten wrong. And I thank you for that, Epics. And one has to also understand the reason I keep tying it back to Trump is that it didn't start until he ran. You go back to the 2012 election, Romney didn't go around saying that the press had printed hoaxes and they were telling things that no one cared about to try and get in the way of his agenda for office, which is what Trump's been doing since he was a candidate. But recognize that much of that distrust is tied into this giant amount of trust for this candidate or this president rather, and I don't get it, because you have people who aren't opposed to the media when it tells stories about others that they don't like that are false, but when it says something that is not necessarily positive about a person you like, then it becomes false. And what's aggravating is that we've gotten to this point now where people start hearing, hey, did you hear about this story? Who's it coming from? They go, Washington Post, LA Times, stick their fingers in their ears and don't want to hear you. And that's a dangerous society where we don't even want to hear information. Regardless if you think it's true or not, listen to the reports. Imagine if every time you were told something that you didn't believe or that you weren't already convinced of, you just shut your ears and just completely cut it off. That's how you destroy the transmission of information and knowledge, which is being done with the current overuse of the term fake news.